Those kind of squishy, intangible human factors really are the drivers behind decision-making that inform what somebody might actually do when they interact with a website.
You can't just have visual and graphics for the sake of looking good or looking cool, right? They need to be fulfilling a business purpose.
Welcome to the Path to Owning It podcast by Provide, hosted by me, Corey Brown, a marketing leader at Provide with over a decade in supporting small businesses. Whether you're an aspiring or established founder, here you'll find tools and advice to start building your legacy and take your business to new heights. To help you achieve your entrepreneurial ambitions, each month we'll tap into our unparalleled network of industry experts who will join us on our quest to provide the answers to your most pressing questions. Like what you hear? Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen. Today, I'd first like to welcome Lacey Picazo to the show. Lacey is the founder and CEO of ZoCo Design, a healthcare-focused product studio that makes understanding people and what to build for them radically easy. With their talent-dense team of designers and researchers, ZoCo uncovers powerful care delivery insights, focuses product priorities through actionable discovery, and moves those insights to impact by designing behavior-shifting experiences. Lacey, welcome to our show. I'm super thrilled to have you with us here today.
Thank you, Corey. I'm excited to be here as well.
And this is a topic I'm personally just really interested in, so I'm really excited to talk to you. So I'm curious, as a user experience or UX studio specializing in what you cleverly call the squishy human factor side of tech, how does ZoCo approach understanding the behaviors and choices of website users? And what role do human factors play in your designs when collaborating with other teams like tech, data, and product?
So human factors is just like a very technical word to say, what are people feeling and thinking in their minds and hearts when they're experiencing anything in life? For today, we're talking about websites. When you're experiencing as a consumer, as an individual, a website, based on what you see and how you understand it, what you perceive, it's going to drive what you feel, what you think, and then what you do. And so the human factors are really trying to understand all of that so you can almost game it, right? Like to understand the puzzle pieces to say, hey, if Corey is experiencing this website, let's say, What do I want Corey to do? What do I want him to understand and believe? And how do we make sure that's true? Because while people can be delightfully irrational, we're all also pretty predictable. And so based on behavior science and really trying to get to the root of what people believe and why they do what we do, those kind of squishy, intangible human factors really are the drivers behind decision-making that inform what somebody might actually do when they interact with a website. And typically, if you have a website, you're trying to get somebody to do something, right? Whether it's sign up for an appointment or make a transaction or make a referral or just be excited about a brand, a company, an organization. And all of those things mean that the website needs to achieve something in order to make me feel and do something. And that's really what we're about at ZoCo is how do we capture all of that knowledge, all of that noise, and translate it into a better design, a better experience of said website so that those things can be true.
Yeah. And websites are so important, especially for small business owners. I'm curious how all of those human factors and what you spoke of, how does that play into establishing kind of the foundational elements of a customer-friendly website that every small business should prioritize?
Absolutely. So I think really what it comes down to is human-centered design. Like when you're creating a website, and I don't just mean developing or designing it, I also mean writing copy, deciding what goes on each page, deciding how you talk about yourself and your benefits and your features and why anyone would choose you. You really have to be thoughtful of that end human who you're trying to speak to. Who are they? What do we want them to understand and believe? And based on that, what behavior are we trying to drive? What do we actually want them to do? And then lastly, what needs to be true to get them to do that thing? And if you're thinking about that and like where somebody is on their journey along the way, it makes it clear what to say, but Corey, really more importantly, what not to say. Like people, we're typically pretty lazy and we don't want to overconsume website information. If I'm hit with a wall of text or, 4 different value props of here's all the things that's great about my company, about my org, I'm like, oh, let me leave that tab open for later. I'm done. Like maybe I'll get back to it, but most likely I won't. And so having like a really concise message that's clearly positioned for the person you're talking to because you're trying to get them to do something. Honestly, that will get companies, small businesses so much further because I think so many times you don't think about who is the person and what am I trying to get them to do? And so you don't have your website lead the person through that journey. And so therefore, then you're not getting the calls, you're not getting the contact form submissions, you're not getting the appointment requests. But of course you're not, because you're not thinking about those key elements in order to guide the person there.
Yeah. And amongst that, I'm sure if you can share, what are some other common mistakes you've seen small businesses make when designing their websites, and how can they avoid that in the future?
The biggest one, Corey, is bloat. And by that, I just mean it's really easy to want to talk to everybody and to want to say you do all the things. You're trying to talk to patients, you're trying to talk to fellow providers, you're trying to talk to payers, you're trying to talk to patients with this condition versus this condition versus this, and also their caregiver. It becomes really unfocused. And then, like, to make a website really work, you have to almost immediately see yourself in it as the consumer, as the user, the patient. That when I read this, I think, oh, they get me. That's for me. That's my troubles. That's what I want. That's what I want to achieve. And so if you don't connect that really quickly, you have a huge chance to lose somebody, and it can happen in the first few seconds, right? And so I think the lack of focus is really what drives it. We worked with a company years ago, and we asked them who is their target customer, who are they trying to serve? And they said, well, anybody in this category. Well, maybe that could be true, Corey, but the reality is if they're trying to speak to everybody, they're probably speaking to no one.
Yeah.
And that's not only who is the target audience of, like, who do you want to attract and really prioritize. It doesn't mean you can't serve other types of customers, but like, who is your ideal best customer that you really want to get more of them? How do you speak to them and their pain points? But then how do you also know, like, what is the hook of what my company, my org does? I present it to them, they're excited. Because the other big challenge we see is a lack of focus and value prop, right? Like It could be, we're this type of clinic and we offer these services, but also this, and you should also choose us because of this, and we're a best place to work, and we're this. And again, people are inherently lazy. They don't want to try and understand all these different things. I would equate it to like job hunting right now, right? Like I know a lot of really talented people who have long careers who are looking for new jobs. And sometimes they'll tell me, Corey, like I'm a longtime marketer who also has done some operation work and also account management, but I'm also really good at finance and bookkeeping. Like I can do all these things. I'm like the jack of all trades. But the challenge is when they tell me that, even if I have a sizable network, I'm like, I don't know where to place you. I don't know who to recommend you to. It sounds like I can recommend you to anyone in my life, but I probably won't, because it doesn't feel like a very clear, like I want to put everyone into a bucket, and I'm not the only person who works that way. And so you want to be able to make sure somebody can identify quickly and see themselves in the copy and the content and the story to say, oh, that's me. I'm a good fit for that. So focus is really the biggest hazard we see with most websites. And a good resource for focusing your copy is there's a book by Emma Stratton called Punchy. And it's just really about how to make sure you're having a targeted, tight message that's in, language and copy people actually say, not a bunch of buzzword bingo. And so I think getting really clear, crystal clear on those elements make a world of difference.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I can totally see the value in that. And I'm wondering, for someone starting out maybe as a new business owner, it's probably really intimidating to narrow this down, right? Because you don't want to narrow your scope of who you can serve. So how would you suggest that they go about defining their primary or ideal audience? And then how do they prioritize that secondary and tertiary audience as well?
Yeah. So if you're brand new, it can be really hard, right? Because the sky feels like the limit and you don't have enough context and data to know. If you've been in business or in an adjacent business and you're looking to narrow, a great place to start can be, who are your best customers? And not just best because they provide the most revenue or they're the largest group, but maybe they're the most delightful to work with, or you never have challenges with them, or they really appreciate what's special about your business and they're likely to pay a premium for it. If you can start to identify answers to those questions, kind of narrow in on your ideal customer profile on an ICP, that's super helpful. But if you're brand new, it takes some research. It takes some trial and error. It takes putting solutions in front of different people, or even just inviting folks to coffee to say hey, I think my practice or my business could be a great fit for you, but can I ask you some questions on, which of these resonate and why? And facilitating some research to improve the odds on your bet. Chances are you're not going to get it completely right the first time. So you have to be open to experimenting and testing and learning to find that ideal audience. But the other thing I would add to that is what's interesting, what we've seen at ZoCo, both at ZoCo directly and for many of our clients, there's certainly fear in narrowing and saying this is the only group we serve and we don't want anybody else. Or not that we don't want anybody else, but this is who we're built for. The reality is, Corey, I think the fear is, well, we could still serve those other groups. We still want to serve those other groups. And you still will. ZoCo's tremendously healthcare focused. in our story and our experience and our clients. But guess what? We do a lot of work with folks who aren't in healthcare too, right?
Yeah.
And we're still a great fit for them. And we can cherry pick where we're going to provide a lot of value and provide a lot of impact. But planting our flag and saying, hey, we're built for healthcare and this is what we do really well, actually has not closed the floodgates to other great things that we can do and continue to test and try. So the other thing I would say is it's not a one-way door, right? Like by saying, I'm going to plant the flag that I'm going to really focus my website for this audience. Like I'm going to focus it for a certain community or a certain type of person. If you find that that's not valuable or effective, you can always make a pivot. You can always try and test something new. And each time you're going to get better data to understand who is that ideal target, that if you're speaking to them, your business is just going to grow exponentially.
Yeah. I found something else you said really interesting about someone experiencing your site and kind of meeting that person where they're at in the moment. I'm curious your advice on how owners can really be confident that the story and the journey they're crafting for that specific audience will really resonate with them at that exact moment that they're visiting the site. How does one even go about that?
So something my teammates are excellent in, Corey, Shane being one of them, is mapping out like what does a customer journey look like? Not just when they're on the website, but all touch points with our brand or organization. What are they likely to be doing, thinking, feeling? And then you can start to place where does the website serve that journey? Because it may not just be at one moment in time. Maybe it is where they first find out about you and kind of validate, do I even want to have a conversation? Do I want to explore further? And then they might utilize it again to schedule or to buy or to get a call placed or, whatever the goal is. And then they might use it again in some other way, like use a client portal or what have you across the journey. When you map all of those, you can think, okay, like there are different moments in time we need to serve them. Based on that, what are they likely to be thinking and feeling? And so, for example, for ZoCo, if we're working with a new client, we found there are very common, frequently asked questions, concerns, wonderments, especially for clients who haven't bought services like ours.
Yeah.
We're a UX design and research studio, and those aren't services that every team has worked with en masse, right? So they might have a lot of questions around like, well, gosh, what would it look like? What do I expect to get out of it? How is this comparable to just hiring a designer? How does this compare with using an AI tool instead? How does this compare with whatever? We get very common questions. And so we've documented them over time to see where are they likely to show up in a prospective client journey? And how do we communicate to them proactively? Because people don't always know how to voice their questions to say, Corey, I'm really wondering about this. But if you get really close to your customer, if you start to understand what they're thinking and feeling when they're worried about payments or when they're worried about, different things, sharing information and data with you, that's a common breaking point for different journeys. Then okay, how could this touch point serve that moment in time differently? But it takes a lot of intention. It takes being close to your customers and being willing to ask them a lot of questions to better understand their holistic experience.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's such a good point. I think that's so valuable too, is to actually get your customer feedback. I think people are maybe sometimes scared to actually do that or don't know how to reach out to them to get the information. But we hear it on the show time and time again, the importance of getting that feedback. Last thing I'm really curious, I think you would have a great answer for is how should small business owners really define the goals of their website and how do they know if and when it's successful? What are those markers?
I love this. Everything needs to have a goal. Like, what are we trying to achieve with this thing that we're investing in? Because if you have a website in any size or capacity, no matter how you built it, like you've made an investment and it's probably an ongoing investment. You're probably going to adapt it or change it or update things over time. And so being mindful of like, what do I hope this thing does? What does success look like? What do I want this to do? And so for some folks, a website is just a validation tool to make sure a company exists, to make sure they're credible, to do some offline research, but it isn't necessarily to take a next step or to facilitate an action or a goal or make a purchase. But for many other websites, they have different goals. Maybe it is about a single acquisition, acquiring a new customer. Maybe it's a long-term retention and engagement play, like using the website as part of that holistic customer journey. I would define what are all of those goals and then stack rank them so that you have a clear priority, because oftentimes those goals can almost take from each other, right? Like they're a bit of a polarity. If I over-index here, this other one's going to atrophy a bit. So know what is the most important thing. What do you hope that this website does? But talking about that makes you more intentional and helps you allocate resources, right? Like let's say we talked to a group, their whole strategy for their website was very focused on team acquisition, like actually hiring, growing, sharing their culture story. And otherwise, the website was used for validation, but it wasn't necessarily to achieve some other action. Other processes happened largely offline, was working well. It's like, okay, well, then that's the priority. Like we could talk about a client portal, we could talk about a learning management system, whatever else the website could do. But your main goals for the next 3 years are to grow your team. So like, let's focus our effort and energy on this story, on this part of the website. And your primary audience then we're thinking about are potential teammates, right? And current teammates, not your end client. And that's okay. And that's a delightful goal, but let's make sure it's clear that's the priority so we don't get caught up in all the ideas or what other people are doing, right? It's very easy because websites are public to say, oh my gosh, but Provide's doing this, so we should be doing that. We should be doing this exact same thing that they're doing. Well, they might have different goals than you or a different audience. And so just looking at others, it's a lot of noise and it can oftentimes get you caught up in allocating resources in places that won't be useful.
Yeah. And that's such a struggle for small business owners too, with usually smaller teams, and time is usually not on their side. So thank you for pointing that out so clearly and distinctly. You know, now that we've discussed the importance of defining a clear strategy for one's website, let's shift our focus to more tactical questions as they relate to design. While clear navigation, defined personas, they can help tell a story, pull users in, I think it's equally important to consider how the visual elements, such as images, colors, layout, how they can enhance or detract from the overall customer experience. So when we come back, we'll speak to Shane Richardson, a senior designer at ZoCo, to talk about this and more. So stay tuned. Are you fresh out of school with big dreams and ambition to achieve them? Or is your current business bursting at the seams and it's time to expand your legacy? If you tend to challenge the status quo and shoot for the moon, Provide's SBA loan may be for you. Our dedicated team of small business experts will work with you to make your ownership dreams, no matter how big, a reality. To get started, visit getprovide.com to see how our tech-enabled small business financing and banking can work for you. Again, that's getprovide.com for when your aspirations of business ownership exceed traditional limits. I'm Corey Brown, and this is Provide's The Path to Owning It podcast. We're back with Shane Richardson, senior designer at ZoCo Design, to discuss the tactical and design elements found on customer-friendly websites. Shane, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, me too. And so I love that Lacey gave us kind of the overall strategy of what one's website should have and the elements of that. I would love for you to kind of dive in on more of these details. So can you share with us how small businesses can effectively use visuals and graphics on their websites to enhance customer engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that, the strategic stuff we talked about before and the visuals and things, they all go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
They build on each other. A lot of the things we'll talk about next, I think we're going to build on things Lacey was talking about before. So like when I think about visuals and graphics, those need to be just as strategic as the business goals that you talked about understanding your users. All of that strategy, those things need to come to life in visuals and graphics as well. So you can't just have visuals and graphics that look good or look cool just for the sake of looking good or looking cool, right? They need to be fulfilling a business purpose in some kind of way. They can't just follow, whatever the current trend is and say, well, we're going to do this because Provide or someone else is doing this, right? So it goes back to really just understanding those users, like what Lacey was mentioning before, digging into their journey and figuring out, what are they feeling when they're coming to our website? Where were they? What were they doing right before they came to our website, right? Like that feeling when they are entering the site has a big impact on how they're feeling when they're using your site, right? So understanding that and really using those insights to create visuals or a feeling or a mood that's going to support where they're at is going to be the thing that's going to give you the most kind of impact from a visual standpoint. So when I think about it in the work that we do at ZoCo, especially in places like healthcare, customers, they may be coming to your site from a place of stress or anxiety. There may be something wrong you're trying to figure out. And so understanding that that's the mental space they're in when they use their site, you can create a mood to either combat or support that. Maybe you want to use visuals to create a feeling of calm or, a supportive feeling that says, hey, we've got your back. You can only do that by knowing that customer and kind of what their thought process when they're using your site and leveraging them visuals to build on that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I personally hadn't ever really thought about like, where are they coming from prior to entering your site? It's always okay, they're here. What journey are they on, right? That makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sharing that. Tagging on to that, once they're on your site, we've talked about what do you want them to do, right? Where are they going? So what are the essential components of an effective call to action or CTA, and how can businesses best incorporate them on their website?
Yeah, we all know that CTAs are super critical, right? They're like the primary vehicle for driving that action that we hope customers are doing on the site. And, one of the pieces that I see talked about a lot that is definitely valid is making sure that the language you're using within your CTA is super specific. So rather than just saying learn more in a button, right? Like, can we really make that action super specific to what we actually want the user to do? Maybe that's book a demo or request a quote, like whatever that action is, like being super specific is going to encourage users when they're about to make that click or about to make that conversion, that they understand what they're getting into. Whereas something like learn more or just a more vague call to action language, you don't really know what you're clicking into or where you're going to end up. And sometimes for some people, that means I don't want to take that next step, or I'm not ready for that next step because I don't know what that's going to look like. And so that's something we see and talk about a lot. But the other piece that I don't see talked about enough, I think, is when it comes to your call to actions, your CTAs, factoring in the overall hierarchy of your page, right? And the content and the other elements that are competing for attention. You can have the best CTA in the world. It can be specific. It can be doing all of the right things. But if you've got 8 other elements on that page, all competing for attention in a similar hierarchy, you're not going to get the engagement or conversion that you're hoping for from that CTA. So really just figuring out what is the biggest priorities on this page, and then factoring those into the whole experience to make sure that the CTA is able to do the job that it's supposed to do without having to worry about fighting against this other part of the page that is important also, but likely not as important maybe as that primary action we're driving.
And is there a certain placement of that call to action on a particular page? Like, I know a lot of people will say it's like the upper right-hand corner is the best place to have one. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, generally throughout, it depends on how many different actions you have, right? But like usually there's one primary one that you want to drive the most folks to. And sure, that can live in your navigation and that can be the top right. It could be wherever. I think usually it's like giving folks a chance to have that action at the top of the page in some way, shape, or form is great, while also having it in some place at the bottom of the page is good, because you're going to have some folks who they're ready to land on your page and maybe it was just a quick validation visit and they're ready to take action. They're ready to jump in. They really don't need to read the rest of the content that you are giving them. Whereas then you're going to have other people who they need to do some of that validation a little bit deeper, maybe assuage some of the fears or concerns they might have before taking that next step. And so that content really works for them. And so then you meet them where they are, whether that's at the very beginning of the site journey or whether it's kind of at the end, but giving them opportunities throughout is going to be the way to maximize that conversion.
And talking about this site journey, what role does website navigation play in user satisfaction? Can you give us some best practices for designing intuitive menus?
Yeah. Obviously, navigation is like super important, but it's also one of those things that your users aren't coming to your site for your navigation necessarily. So when we think about user satisfaction, they're usually coming to do a task or find information or whatever that is. And so navigation is not going to be the thing that is like that primary driver of satisfaction, but it does do kind of the inverse, which is if it prevents me from doing those actions or tasks or finding that information I'm looking for, it's going to immediately start to erode that satisfaction and that kind of experience as a whole, which we obviously don't want. So it's one of those things that I think you can really dig into. How do I design a nice navigation and do these things? But you really have to figure out the right ways to build that into the structure, And so when I think about like best practices and creating that good navigation experience, it actually starts way before you would do anything on the website. It's, to use the puzzle analogy that I think we talked about earlier, I look at it as it's like a puzzle exercise. You have to kind of take a look, bird's eye view. What are all of the pages or pieces of the puzzle that I have on my table from like a content and page perspective? Figure out, how do I group some of these things together that are like content? Users are going to want to engage with this type of content at similar places of the website journey, and start to figure out these are the ways that things should sit together, And so then you start to figure out that puzzle. Once you figure out and are satisfied with the way you've kind of grouped content, then it's about getting into the website. Okay, what's the actual menu I'm designing? Do I have like a mega menu, or is it just a standard kind of top nav? figuring out all of those kind of comes secondary to really developing like the strategy and wayfinding of your content as a holistic kind of piece.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. I love that puzzle analogy. And speaking of content, in terms of content, what types of information should small businesses specifically prioritize for their website to ensure they do meet their customer needs and expectations?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like a broken record, at this point about talking about understanding your users, right? But that's really what it comes down to. Understanding your users and what they're looking for, because what one user type values for one business is going to be super different for another business's customers, right? And so when we think about how do we start to do that, I think you just have to find what content they find valuable specifically and supports them in whatever stage that they're in that moment. So you could take the approach of just kind of putting content out there and seeing what performs the best over time. And that can kind of help you figure out, well, what's working and what doesn't. And that's one approach. It's a little bit more iterative and maybe takes a little bit more time to figure out. But the other option would be sit down and do maybe a little bit more formal user research to understand which content topics are my customers or my users the most interested in, either through, running like a survey, or maybe you're sitting down and facilitating an interview with your customers, or really any other kind of research method that's going to allow you to get that feedback and really open the door to understand what they're really looking for.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Are there any tools or resources that you could share that would help small business owners gather that feedback, and how should they gather that and implement what they find?
We like to tell people that the best tool or resource that they have is really going to be their customers, right? So there's plenty of tools out there where people can test your website and give feedback, but if that's not calibrated to be a representative of who your actual audience is or your customers, it may not give you the real feedback you should be focusing on. So really finding ways to open any lines of communication with your users is incredibly important. So that could be like tactically, right? Like that could be a small component on the site that just solicits feedback and allows users an avenue to give feedback. I mean, we've seen those before, but in other scenarios, it might be something that's a little bit more on the side, right? Like maybe I have a panel of really loyal customers that I know I can go to and gather feedback as we iterate, test, and launch new things. But just having really any form of communication open with your users is going to be so incredibly valuable. Even if it's only a few, finding that avenue is going to be so valuable in evolving the website and setting it up for success.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing everything with us today, Shane. If any of our listeners would like to contact ZoCo Design for more information about their websites, what's the best way for them to reach your team?
I think definitely just visit zocodesign.com. And we have contact forms, as well as, if you're local, especially, we're super involved in the community. We facilitate events both at the ZoCo studio and in other places all of the time. So any avenue of connecting, we're always happy to meet new people, is super great.
Awesome. Well, Shane, Lacey, again, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's clear you guys are the absolute best people we could have had on to talk about website strategy and getting down in the details with us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks for joining us. The path to owning a business is a nuanced journey. We hope you discovered something in this episode that eases your path to success. If so, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Have a topic you'd like discussed in a future episode? Drop us a line in the comments section or send us a message on social media. If you're ready to take control of your future and start building your legacy, be sure to visit getprovide.com. You can view our resources page for more helpful tools, learn how our all-in-one financial and banking products can help you on your path to business ownership, and pre-qualify for financing in under 2 minutes with no impact on your credit score. The Path to Owning It is brought to you by the team at Provide, and it's produced by PodCamp Media, branded podcast production for businesses. podcampmedia.com. Producer Dusty Weiss, editor Emily Kasinger. For Provide, I'm Corey Brown. Thanks for being on the journey with us.
Provide is a division of Fifth Third Bank, National Association. All opinions expressed by the participants are solely their current opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Provide, its affiliates, or Fifth Third Bank. The participants' opinions are based on information they consider reliable, but neither Provide, its affiliates, nor Fifth Third Bank warrant its completeness or accuracy and should not be relied upon as such. This content is for informational purposes and does not constitute the rendering of legal, accounting, tax, or investment advice or other professional services by Provide or any of its affiliates. Please consult with appropriate professionals related to your individual circumstances. All lending is subject to review and approval.